Welcome to Nasdaq Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq. Joining me to discuss the Dorsey Wright MLP Index is Ben Jones, Product Development Specialist with Nasdaq Index Research. Ben, it's great to see you. Welcome back to Trade Talks.
Yeah, thanks for having me on this week.
All right, let's take a look at your first slide here and give us an overview of the index.
Yeah, for sure. It's something that's a little bit different. We're kind of pivoting from what our normal content is, by talking about an area of the market that has really struggled. But I think there is a bright spot here when looking at the DWAMLP Select Index. And so I think it's important to have some context first, right, before we explore the index. And if you just think about today's marketplace, and for the average investor, especially one that is looking for income, you have to go searching for it, right? The U.S. 10-year Treasury yield index is around like 65 basis points, 0.65%. The aggregate bond ETF that is popular is yielding around 2.38%. The S&P 500 is just under 2%, around 1.93. So you really have to go looking for yield. Sometimes it can take you to some uncomfortable places. And one area that has historically been a good provider of income has been the MLP space, master limited partnerships. However, it's an area that has really struggled this year. If you look at the average MLP fund year to date, down about 40%, about 39.05%. Looking at data on the Nasdaq Dorsey Wright system. Other areas that have struggled, financials and banks in Latin America, but MLP, unfortunately, that space wins that award. With that said, though, the DWAMLP Select Index has really kind of navigated the market, quite proficiently, especially in an area that has struggled. And so when you look at this index, it follows a kind of a unique methodology that allows it to provide value. So the index starts with, an MLP universe, and then add some, some liquidity and size screens, right? So there's a minimum market capitalization of 250 million. That's a requirement. You have to have 1 month average daily trading volume of about 2 million. And then they add the Dorsey Wright relative strength process, right? Where we rank those MLPs by their relative strength and ultimately allocate to the 15 strongest MLPs. And that process is done every month, Jill.
All right, so if we take a look at how the relative strength ranking is done, we can see some of those names that have made it into the index.
Yeah, and that's, again, think process with this particular index. And it's really what makes it unique, and I think is one reason why it has, worked, this year, relatively speaking, of course. So right. The process is a three-step process, right? MLP universe, we take the universe of MLPs, and again, this includes the whole spectrum, right? So you have your upstream names, right? These are the names that, are kind of extracting the oil and the natural gas. You have the midstream, those that are transporting it, think pipelines. You have the downstream names, right? These are the ones that are, converting it or refining it, so to speak. So we take this, diversified universe, we rank it on a relative strength process. That's what the Dorsey Wright process adds, and you see that ranking in the middle. It uses the Nasdaq Dorsey Wright, relative strength matrix process, which, they apply to a lot of other different indexes, but for this particular one, rank it from strongest to weakest. And then you end up with, let's say, the top 15 names, and that's done on a monthly basis. So you're constantly, picking up those 15 strongest MLPs. And this gives you a lineup that's focused, but it's an area that has momentum, and it's an area that will pivot based off of the prevailing trends in the MLP space. So, some markets you might see a concentration in the midstream names. Some markets you might see a concentration in downstream. Other times it just might be really across the board. What's interesting, if you look at data, going back, I believe to the August review, the average yield was around 14% at the end of, July, early August. So you can have some high yielding names in this index.
Yep, and there's a reason why they are high yielding. So on that note, Ben, let's take a look at the performance. What are you looking at the index relative to?
Yeah, so if you look at this index, and you can compare it to a couple different indexes that are out there, and some of the research notes that we at the Nasdaq Index R&D team put out, we look at a couple different ones ranging from the energy, the commodity itself, to just oil and gas securities, or to other MLP names. And so in this particular example, we're looking at it against the Alerian MLP Index, looking at it on a total return basis. And you can just see the difference in performance and the difference in the journey that these two indexes really have experienced over the last 5 years or so, and even just in 2020 alone. Again, performance has been tough in this space. Year to date, The DWAMLP index is down about, it's almost 27% this year. But if you look at, let's say, the Alarian index is down about 38. So it's working on a relative basis. Oil is still down around 30. But if you look back on a 5-year basis, on a total return basis, it's only down 3%, while the Alarian is down about 46. So while, again, it's in the red, but for those that have a mandate for MLP exposure, or for those that are looking for ways to supplement or complement kind of income exposure, this index is a little bit different than what you traditionally see. But again, it's done well in a very weak market. Using some of the Nasdaq Dorsey Wright data provides a fantastic lens at what's going on here. The average energy stock's down around 47% this year. So this is an area that has really struggled, yet the DWAMLP select index has been a bright spot, relatively speaking, Jill.
So then that would be thanks, of course, to the relative strength ranking.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, again, it's been in the sense that, it's finding those areas that are doing well, right? And it adapts. And I think that's what you see really across the Nasdaq Dorsey Wright, index lineup is that it adapts to the prevailing trends. And so, some of the trends that we're seeing out there, right, is certainly, outside of MLPs, of course, is in the ESG space. So I definitely, before I, close, I want to highlight that, we are hosting an ESG virtual summit. So that's the Nasdaq ESG virtual summit. Will be on September 22nd. If you go to www.nasdaq.com/NASDAQ-ESG-virtual summit 2020, you can find the URL. I think it's going to be a really compelling event, Jill. It's going to be like a 5-hour event. There's 9 virtual interactive sessions with speakers from some firms like Nasdaq Dorsey Wright, Nasdaq Investment, Invesco, First Trust, Track Insight, just to name a few. And we'll provide a good survey of what's going on in the ESG landscape today, and really what it means for the future, and how it's going to impact the market that we live in, and how it creates some opportunities for investors.
Yeah, that sounds like an awesome opportunity, Ben. Thanks so much for joining us on Trade Talks.
You're welcome. Thank you.
And thanks for joining me. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.